Hello, welcome to Working with Miniatures. I'm Jim, and tonight we're going to be painting Holly the Christmas Elf from the Reaper Miniatures 12 Days of Reaper. Let's get started. This miniature was airbrushed, but I'll be base coating everything by brush, so you don't need to do anything with an airbrush. The airbrush work was to serve as an undercoat for speed paints, but I changed my mind as I'm wanting to get away from using so many speed paints. I chose to do the base coat in topaz skin, which was thinned way down to the point that it took me 5 coats to finish this base coat. You don't need to thin your paint this much. I did this on purpose as this serves as a repetitive brush control practice and practice on thinning my paints, both of which could stand improvement. With the base coat done, I start adding a light shadow all over the flesh. I'll be blocking in the eye sockets with black, but I went ahead and added some shadow in the sockets anyway. This is good practice for eyes without really having to be as careful, but also any areas around the socket that isn't black will still have some natural shade to it. I add a second shadow covering less areas and focusing this in the deeper, darker recesses. All of the shadows and lights are assuming the sun is overhead. I actually wanted to have darker shadows ending with a deep purple, but that wouldn't make sense on a sunny day for a pale woman standing over white snow. I add one final shadow, just add a little more contrast for the highlights that'll soon follow. As an unrelated note, I've been having consistent issues with my desktop computer with it completely freezing. Mouse won't move, can't turn off numlock, etc. 100% unresponsive. I reinstalled Windows and everything, and I was almost not able to put this video out as I kept forgetting about a piece of software after another that I forgot to install. With the shadows finished, I turn back to the base coat color and correct any spots I added shadow to that should not have it. In regards to the freezing issue still, unfortunately it's happening even after a reinstall. BIOS, Windows, my drivers, everything like that is up to date. I removed all my unnecessary peripherals and ruled out the hard drives failing by trying another one from a working computer. I'm now in the process of ruling out my memory sticks. Finally, we can start adding highlights. Again, these are added while keeping in mind the light source is directly overhead. I can tell you now that I had to come back and redo her abdominal muscles as they were not wide enough, especially on her left side, or the right from your viewing perspective. Unfortunately for you, I'm going right back to venting on my PC woes. The issue is odd. If I'm running a game and the machine is under stress, it doesn't freeze. It only happens if I'm typing in a document or browsing a web page, something that doesn't stress the system. SFC scan, crystal disk, Heaven benchmark at full blast, memory checks, everything comes back good. It's just when the PC is not doing anything taxing, it freezes. Time for another highlight. This will go in the same places as the last one, just covering less area. Now back to my infuriating PC issue. Sometimes it'll go 5 minutes after a boot, sometimes it's days. Nothing in the event log and task scheduler. Nothing ran at that time. I actually built out a PowerShell script to easily report all that, so I can run it as soon as I reboot, hoping I'd find a smoking gun, but to no avail. Can only hope it's not my motherboard, CPU, or video card, as I really don't want any more unplanned expenditures. Also, that's going to be harder to troubleshoot. It's not like I have another graphics card lying around to swap out. This will be the final highlight, and I add very little of this last one, just to try to add a little more shine. I call it quits for the flesh for now and move on to the clothing. The clothing is only going to be done with 4 colors, despite how many different layers we used for the flesh. This is because after looking at the folds of her gloves and boots, I realized she doesn't work for Santa, she's wearing vinyl. This isn't an elf. I know a stripper when I see one, and this one, why, she's a ho-ho-ho. I googled some images of vinyl boots and gloves, the kind she would wear, and vinyl doesn't have a lot of soft transitions readily visible, so I take the same harsh approach here with 4 colors making up the base coat, a shadow, and 2 highlights. The highlights I made fairly large as I wanted the appearance of the clothing to be almost reflective. After I finish this highlight, I make any touch-ups needed on the flesh or on the clothing, such as fixing her abdominal muscles. The rest I paint off camera, though you aren't really missing anything, as 90% of the work and time went into the flesh and clothing. The hair took less than 5 minutes as there's so little of it, stripper joke, and I just grabbed random metallics for the presents, throwing dark tone wash over the ribbons to fill the folds. I used Azure Magic around her outer eye sockets and as lipstick because, well, stripper. For the base, I mix AK Interactive Snow texture with water until it looks like it would be delicious in coffee, and then I spread it carefully, immediately removing any that I get on her feet or too high on the presents. This I moved fairly fast with. I wanted to be careful of keeping it off of her, but I needed it all to stay wet for when I sprinkle on the AK Interactive's micro balloons. When it dries, most of the micro balloons will stay in place. Here I wanted the look of heavy fresh snow, so I used a lot of micro balloons, with the first snow texture just to build out and level the base. However, I could have used less micro balloons and let some of the first snow texture show through, giving the impression of a little fresh snow built up on top of old slush. This is the final result. I'm really happy with how this miniature came out, however there are a few things I want to go back and correct. To start with, her left eye is pretty bad. I completely repainted that eye 5 times before I figured out what's wrong with it. There's a tiny imperfection or bump just off center of where her pupil would be, so the pupil looks fine from one angle, but turn it just a little and you can no longer see it. I'll need to cut or file this down so it looks like the other eye, and then I should be able to paint it again. Also, her pupils just need to be bigger. About 1/3 of the visible sclera would be about right. I think I want to go back and try to paint a design or on one or more of the presents. I did purple polka dots on one of them by her right foot, but it looks out of place since none of the others are as festively decorated. Here's a look at all the paints and tools I used for this project. That's going to wrap it up for tonight. I hope you learned something or were inspired to start or expand your own collection. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time. I'm Jim, and this is Pumpkin from Working with Miniatures. We're truly grateful for your time, and we'll bid you a fond farewell. To the next video. You are wet. Why are you wet?